for joining me today on Ask a Black Girl, the podcast. You know, guys, sometimes on this podcast we talk about my alleged neurodiversity. Well, Exhibit A is my challenge in executive functioning. The ultimate example is my interview with the amazing Dr. K. Dr. K stands for Dr. Karen Baptiste. She's an educator in the Bronx. Dr. K's documentary sheds light on the preschool to prison pipeline that some children unfortunately experience, particularly in underserved communities. But she also offers some solutions. Additionally, she has wonderful workshops for other educators on how to create a more inclusive environment for all types of learners. Stay tuned for my amazing conversation with Dr. K, and feel free to check out her documentary at her website or on Amazon Prime. I'm Dr. K. Hi, Dr. K. Hello.
How are you?
I'm great. Too blessed to be stressed, as they say, as the old folks say.
Listen.
So where are you joining us from today?
Good old New York City from the boogie down Bronx.
I love it. That's where you're from originally, right?
Yes.
Amazing. Well, you know, I just read some bits and bobs from your official bio, but you know, the Midwesterner me loves to just get more of hear it from the horse's mouth. So tell me a little bit about how you became to be Dr. K and a little bit about your background.
You know, when people say how I became Dr. K, I'm still becoming Dr. K. Right. But in short, I worked in education. I was a special education teacher. I still work in education, right? Like that doesn't leave you no matter what you choose to do outside of the industry. But I was working as a special education teacher in the South Bronx. And I started noticing a pattern of Black and brown boys being referred for special education. Now, there were students who needed the services, and there were a larger amount of students who did not need the services. And so I started looking at why are so many students being referred for special education. And I literally started pointing at kids, right? And I'm saying, he doesn't need this. He doesn't need this. He doesn't need this. She doesn't need this. You know, maybe they just need, some of my students really just needed counseling, right?
Right.
Just minor, just something that didn't even require lifelong services. And my students were brilliant. Those babies were brilliant. And I make a joke, but it's not a joke. I remember, you know, they used to ban YouTube for us. I don't know if they still do that for teachers, but they banned YouTube. We weren't allowed to get videos for our lessons on YouTube. Who you think used to break the proxy codes for me? My students who were labeled with special education. I was like, okay. They were like, oh, this is how you do it. And they were 8. Okay. So I was like, no. And then looking at the disability diagnosis, I'm like, are y'all crazy? This baby does not have. So I actually started decertifying my students. I started decertifying. Oh, absolutely. The ones.
So how do you do that? How do you do that? And let's take a step back. There are people like me who have kids, happen to be ADHD classified, but how were these children put in this bucket to begin with? Where you were working? How was that done?
Several students. First of all, most of them are put there for behavior. That has nothing to do with my cognitive abilities, what I can and can't do. ADHD seems to be the hot diagnosis for children of color. For Hispanic children, it usually is speech and language impairment, right? I'm saying a child not speaking English doesn't mean that they need special education services, but there seems to be a pipeline for Hispanic children who don't speak English and assuming that they don't understand the content. Why are we giving them assessments in English? Give them the assessments in their native language. I mean, you give me a test in German, of course I'm going to fail. So now I'm tracked right into special education. And that's how the system has been for so long. So with decertifying, for my students who truly did not need that, I would have the conversation with their parents and ask them, how did you sign off on this?
Yes,
And
that was going to be the question.
the school system plays on their ignorance. Right. And so if you don't know and you're told, oh, as a new teacher, I'm 21 years old, and you're told, oh, a child doesn't sit down, something must be wrong. A child doesn't do this, a child doesn't do that, a child says this, a child says that. Okay. And these are the markers that we look for. And so most kids are being referred for defiance. Defiance.
I was going to say defiance. How, so what are these, first of all, that what you just told me reminds me of my family's own experience where, my mom grew up in the South Side of Chicago, right? When her Black parents moved up from the South and registered her for school, do you know they changed her name on the thing? They thought that her name was Shara, and they actually changed it to Shirley because they just thought that my parents were ignorant. My grandparents were ignorant. And my mom, it's so funny. I never understood why my grandfather, I thought it was just his accent. I'm like, why does granddaddy always call you Shara? She's like, well, that's actually my real name. But my mother has gone throughout her life, her professional life, and she has master's degrees and all that stuff, but as Shirley. But that's not her real name. Isn't that interesting? Wow. So it's kind of interesting, like you're saying, how these little bits and bobs of changes these people make can affect a child, the trajectory of their lives.
Absolutely. Because as I started going through my career, I found out that an IEP certification that they graduate with, they call it an IEP diploma. How misleading is that for parents? Right? Students literally will graduate from school with an IEP diploma in many places.
What does that empower you to do?
That's not a real diploma. It's just a certification of attendance. But you hear diploma, right? Because we graduate with a high school diploma. So when you hear that, you're like, okay, my child has an IEP diploma. They still have a diploma. It says they just had an IEP diploma. It's not a real diploma. It's a certification of attendance. And that is the misguidance, right? The miseducation of us as educators, because they didn't tell us that. I learned that along my journey, and parents don't know it. So they don't even know that their child graduated with this certification of attendance that we mask with the label of IEP diploma. So my students who didn't need it and could have done quite well in a ICT setting, which is an integrated co-teaching classroom, where you have students with IEPs blended with students without IEPs. So you have a general ed teacher and a special education teacher. So they have two teachers in the classroom. Now, when you think about when special education happened, and we think about a free and appropriate education, which is FAPE, we're always supposed to aim for the least restrictive environment, LRE, not most restrictive. You're always supposed to go for the least restrictive environment for the child first. We have it backwards, right? So a lot of times in many places, they just either don't know the federal law, or they just bypass it and do whatever they want in hopes that the parent doesn't know.
So you identified the problem correctly in the school you were working. Were you at elementary or a high school or middle school at that
Elementary.
point? Elementary school. You defined the problem. I want the tea. Did you run into pushback?
Oh, of course. I didn't care. I've always been a rebel.
Listen,
I've always been a blend of Angela Davis, Malcolm X, and Harriet Tubman.
So tell me about some of those challenges and how you surpass those challenges.
Because I do what's right for kids. And so what people understand, when you're doing what you know is based on humanity, dignity, love, respect, you're not going to care about that other stuff.
That's right.
Because I was doing what I knew was right. I had one student, I remember I was teaching second grade that year. And at the time, during that time, we still had the label of mental retardation. It's now been changed to intellectual disability.
That just got changed?
Intellectual disability, it's been changed for quite a while, but it was the original classification was mental retardation.
Wow.
And he did require services, but mental retardation was not an appropriate diagnosis for this child.
Right.
And I look back at the IEP. At this point, he was 7, maybe even 8 at that point. And I started reading the notes of what the psychologist wrote. And at 5 years old, she gave him a diagnosis of mental retardation. In her notes, she wrote that he would not respond to her questions during the assessment. Now, at 5, the child just came to the United States. The child did not speak English. He's 5. You're a stranger. He was probably scared. He probably didn't even understand what you were asking.
Right.
And I was like, how did this get by? How did nobody look at this and challenge this? This is insane.
Wow.
And
Wow.
yes, so I called his parents in and I said, this is the process. You're going to challenge this. You're going to have them reassess him. This is not the appropriate diagnosis. And the parents were crying and they were like, we are new to the country. We don't know. We're told that this is what our son has and this is who they tell us he is. And it didn't feel right to us, but they told us sign the paper and we did.
Wow. So tell me a little bit more about, so obviously Preschool to Prison is this amazing documentary. That is your personal passion project. Tell me a little bit more about the role of implicit bias. We've kind of talked around it, but what specific statistics have you found around implicit bias of children of color? And I want to know about, something that really caught my eye, right, with the documentaries, all these images with police. Are police necessary in schools? And if so, why or why not?
So let's start with the implicit bias piece. We all have bias. When people
Yeah.
start believing that they don't, those are the people that probably have more than the average, right? Like they're just in denial because we all have bias. Now, also, I want to clarify bias inherently is not a bad thing. People get
Right.
really offended when there are biasy trainings and all. It's inherently not, we use bias in our everyday life about everything.
Correct.
Even when we're in a supermarket, right? You
Yep.
have a preferred brand over another brand. Bias becomes a bad thing based on how we use it. When we're using it to bring harm, to discriminate with harm, right?
Yes.
That's when our bias becomes a bad thing, but inherently it's not a bad thing. It's
That's
how
right.
we use it, right?
Right.
So I want to clarify that. Now, there are many studies that show students that have teachers of color tend to fare better, meaning they tend to feel seen, they tend to
All
have more
students, sorry to interrupt
sense,
you, all
even
students?
all students, even white students. They have done
Wow.
surveys, even with white students who have indicated that when they had a teacher of color, they felt more accepted, they felt more of a sense of belonging, and they felt more of achievement in those rooms, right? Which is very interesting. However,
Wow.
there are other studies that also show Black teachers or teachers of color and white teachers, we equally have bias, right? We equally come in with these preconceived notions. They've shown that teachers of color tend to be a lot more empathetic and will have those characteristic traits in as part of their teaching, right? Obviously, as humans, we tend to connect with the people that we have things in common with, and we tend to be a lot more understanding with the people we have connections with.
Right.
That's across racial groups. However, now let's fast forward into the impact of bias in education. So there was actually a study done. I don't know if you heard of this study. There was a study done by the Yale Child Study Center.
Okay.
And they did a study with teachers, with
Okay.
preschool teachers, and they told them that they wanted them to track misbehaviors. Right, that they were going to show them students, have them watch a group of students, and they had Black teachers, white teachers, right? They had a mix, and they had a class, and the students were also mixed race in the class, right? What they didn't know was that the computer had eye tracking software on it, to
Wow.
see, to
Oh, I've heard
see,
of this one.
yes,
Yes.
where the teachers were looking.
I love that.
And what they found was the white teachers and the black teachers alike all tracked the black boys for misbehavior. And
Mm-hmm.
here's the thing, there was no misbehavior in the video. They just used the words look for misbehavior, but there was none.
Okay.
Right? And so they already came in with this preconceived notion black is bad.
Going back to your documentary, which I think is such an important piece. Um, do my ADHD brain had me all over the place a few minutes ago, but do talk to me about police presence in schools and whether or not you think they're necessary.
Um, that's I get asked that. And in short, it actually has shown to cause more harm than good. There that like because I
Mhm.
can share my opinion on that, but there have been studies that show that police presence actually increases uh, chances of arrests for kids. It actually causes more harm than it does good for children. I do understand where people are in support of police in school because of the mass shootings that have happened. So I do remain sensitive to that and understand why people would feel safer with police in school. Now, if police in schools were used for that and that only, for true crime, I wouldn't be then I wouldn't be on the fence about that, right? Um, because everybody wants to live in a safe world. Um, and so if police in schools are used for crime, then okay, we have them for crime. But that's not what police are in school for. We are utilizing police, over utilizing police, right, for misbehaviors. Misbehaviors.
Mhm. Mhm.
And let's be clear, things that we consider misbehaviors. I mean, children are being arrested, have been, and continue to be arrested for non-violent crimes, for things that aren't even
Wow.
crimes. For things that aren't even crimes. Let's
Wow.
start there. Forget about non-violent, for things that aren't even crimes. The fact that children have been arrested for using cell phones, which I highlight in the documentary. The young lady who was arrested
Yeah.
at school because she took her cell phone out. She wasn't even just arrested, she was assaulted. She was
Wow.
dragged, flipped over by
Wow.
a male police officer, dragged across her classroom because she used her cell phone.
It's so
So
hard to
not
watch.
only
I know.
was this trauma inflicted, violence and trauma inflicted upon this young lady, but also the children sitting there observing this. Not only was she arrested for using her cell phone, the young lady who recorded it in the classroom was also arrested. We've all been
What
conditioned. We have
we've
all
all been
been
conditioned.
conditioned to
We've all
believe
been
black is bad. Even black people believe black is bad, right? That's what we've been conditioned to believe about ourselves
I
and how
just
we
it is
respond, right? I think it was a comedian, I think it was Wanda Sykes. I don't where she talked about if we saw a white man running down a block, our assumption is he's late for a meeting.
right.
We see
Right.
a black man running down the block, we're assuming, what did he do? Who's he running from?
That's right. And this, I got to tell you, so two things well, in the implicit bias conversation, this really speaks to me as the mother of two mixed race. And let's be honest, we're in a country with one drop rule. Okay. They are black.
Mhm.
Okay. Boys. And they both have ADHD. Okay. One who is probably, it's obviously more obvious than the other. Right. And this is a struggle I run into on a daily. Listen, we're about to do back to school. So what have I done? Right? I have emailed the teacher. I've requested to meet with the teacher in person first. One of them, I actually have made a guide on a Google Doc for, if he does this, this is what it means. Because in my opinion is, I think it's, tell me what your thought of the teachers is, you might as well get ahead of the process and say, listen, we all have bias. I know you might have this bias. This is what it is. This is what it isn't. Okay.
Yes.
And let's have an open dialogue on how we do this. Because my concern is, I have friends, even friends of color, like, well, why are you doing that? That's just going to make them stick out and this or that. And I'm like, first of all, I want them to know that their mommy is, but she will come for them. That's one.
Hello, I'm not that parent.
yeah. We're not going to do it here. You got the wrong. I mean, I always used to say, you got the wrong Negro, right? And then my husband doesn't like that. But the other thing is, they are in elementary school, and one is about to start middle school. This is when, again, I use this term all the time. This is when the self-fulfilling prophecy begins, and this is when the growth mindset happens. I don't want them to start thinking that they are bad or not smart or I'm bad or this and that kind of stuff. And this is why I keep on doing the air quotes, because a lot of the conversations I've had, not even with teachers, I'll tell you where the really unstudied part is extracurricular activities, because these people are not trained to deal with most kids with ADHD. So you add an ADHD boy, so that's when you get words like, oh, kind of aggressive or disruptive. And a lot of times, it's like LA law. Like I'm interviewing these people and I'm like, well, what happened in the situation? What was said to him? Like, I'm definitely that parent I never thought I'd be, in terms of being like, okay, this happened, but what happened before that? What are your thoughts?
Oh gosh, so many thoughts there. No, I love that you do that you send that, because listen, as a teacher, I didn't know that. I didn't know all that information. They think we get some really deep, explicit training as special education teachers. No, we don't. No, we don't. I had to learn things on my own. I was that person that looked things up, that would study the DSM-4 and DSM-5. Like, I studied those books to understand, like, what did the disabilities mean, the disability labels. I didn't have in-depth training about, when you see this behavior, this is an appropriate way to respond. I had to learn through trial and error.
Right.
And so having that, you are their number one teacher as parents, your child's number one teacher. Yeah. Schools are not a replacement for parents. I didn't have that training. As special education teachers, we don't get some specialized in-depth training on what to do when this happens, when you see this, that this means this and not that. Trainings are getting better, but I didn't have any of that when I was a special education teacher. I had to read the DSM-5 to know what it was. I think maybe at the time
I just think that's criminal. We even live in it. We're now in the suburbs. We're in an affluent suburb outside of New York, where all these people are supposedly really educated, right? Half of them went to an Ivy League school. Yeah. Same thing, because my youngest one has an aide, and I found myself getting upset at first. The first this is when he was in first grade. I would get upset. Well, why are you? And I realized she doesn't have the training. Everybody's traumatized. Crazy. What can we do to help? Is there anything that we, the viewer of this, can do to help the problem that you have so beautifully highlighted in your documentary?
Number one thing is, first, we need to change policies. People want to know, where do we start? We start with our local school district. Even if you don't have children, this impacts everybody, whether you have children or not. That's what people don't understand. Think about what kind of society we have. You said cat ladies included? Is that what you included? Yeah. Cat ladies included, right? But we all have a responsibility. People don't realize, even if you don't have children, you are impacted by this. You're impacted by this, because what kind of society will we have if we continue to inflict trauma, violence, and pain on children, when we also know the human brain does not fully develop until 25? So you think about all of this that is happening. What is going to happen when they become of age? What is going to happen to that generation who is then going to be responsible for us if they're not well? What is going to public safety? What will that feel like? What will happen to the financial economy? We have to think about all those things if we do not prepare our children and create safe havens for them. So we need to start looking at, what are the policies in our local school districts around discipline. Every district has a policy handbook and discipline policy codes. Every district has this,
Interesting.
right? And so that's public knowledge. It's not a secret. It should be on every district's website.
So
Things
interesting.
usually are in plain sight. You
Wow.
have the right to ask to see it. Show up to school board meetings. Ask about the policies. Challenge those policies. They're going to continue to implement these things because they know in certain communities you're not going to say anything.
People view.
Follow us on Instagram at preschool to prison doc, DOC. And that's where we'll make our announcements. So you can follow us there, where you'll see all of what we're doing and keeping up to date. Folks can find me on LinkedIn as well. If you look up Dr. K, Karen Baptiste, you'll find me on LinkedIn as well. We just, honestly, if you just Google preschool to prison, we come up.
So much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Rhonda, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And I look forward to connecting with you again. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hey guys, my cup filling moment for today is rather personal. As I chat with you today, we've just finished the end of an amazing school year for my youngest child, who's in elementary school, and so it's called a 2E neurodiverse child. As we drove in the car a few weeks ago, my son said to me, "I love all of my teachers. They're my friends." I was verklempt. We've gone from Real Housewives-like meetings with the principal to a complete love fest on a daily basis for my son at school. There's nothing like your child feeling included or loved. And my hat is off to all of those gen ed and special ed teachers. I hope you guys have a wonderful summer, and thank you for being you. Thanks for joining us today at Ask a Black Girl, the podcast. Feel free to follow me on Instagram or email me at rana@askablackgirlthepodcast.com. Have a great day.